Sometimes the quiet in a house is not peaceful. It is a heavy blanket of loneliness, and Elsie Whitford felt its weight every single day. The little clock on the mantel tick-tocked, a steady sound that only seemed to make the silence deeper. Elsie sat in her father's old armchair, her hands folded in her lap. The house was too big for one person. It had been ever since her parents had passed away, first her mother and then just a few months ago her father. For years her life had a clear purpose. She was a daughter. She cooked their meals, read to them from the Bible, and held their hands when they were ill. She kept the house clean and warm. But now they were gone. The work was done and no one needed her anymore. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world was going on as usual. People walked down the street, children played, and wagons rolled by. But inside, Elsie felt still, like a pond that had no stream flowing into it. She was alone and she was not yet 30. The future stretched out before her, empty and quiet. A stack of mail sat on the small table by the door. Most of it was bills or advertisements. She sorted through it without much interest until one newspaper advertisement caught her eye. It was tucked between notices for farm equipment and sewing thread. She pulled it out and read the words slowly. Rancher in the Wyoming Territory with 3 young children seeks a woman of sturdy character and gentle heart. Object: matrimony. I seek a helper for the ranch and a caretaker for my children, who have been quiet since their mother's passing. I can offer a good home and honest treatment. Please write to Reuben Hale, care of the Cedar Ridge Post Office. Elsie read it again. And then a third time. Her heart beat a little faster. A rancher. 3 children. Quiet since their mother's passing. The words painted a picture in her mind. She saw a man tall and strong but with sad eyes. She saw children who had lost their laughter. She saw a house that needed filling with warmth, just like her own empty house did. A strange feeling stirred inside her. It was not excitement exactly. It was more like a small, quiet hope. Here was someone who needed a gentle heart. Here was work for her hands and a purpose for her days. She was not looking for a grand romance. She was looking for a place to belong, to be useful. She thought about her parents. Her mother had always said that God had a plan for everyone, even when the path was hard to see. Elsie had prayed for a sign, for a direction. Could this be it? Was this lonely rancher and his quiet children the answer to her prayers? She sat down at the small writing desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. What could she say to a complete stranger? How could she explain who she was? She dipped the pen in the inkwell and began to write. Dear Mr. Hale, my name is Elsie Whitford. I read your advertisement in the Gazette. I too know the weight of quiet in a home. I have recently lost my own parents after caring for them for many years. I am a hard worker. I can cook, clean, tend a garden, and I am not afraid of hard work. I am a woman of faith and I believe in kindness. She paused, thinking of the children. Her heart softened. I am sorry for the loss of your wife, and for the sorrow of your children. A child should not have to be too quiet for too long. If you think I might be a help to your family, I would be pleased to hear from you. Sincerely, Elsie Whitford. She folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it. The next day she walked to the post office and mailed it. As the envelope disappeared into the mailbag, she felt a flutter of fear. What was she doing? This was a wild, crazy idea. But as she walked back to her quiet house, she also felt something else. For the first time in months, the future did not seem so empty. There was a tiny, flickering light of possibility ahead. She did not know what would happen, but she had taken a step. And for now that was enough. The train journey felt as long as the wait for a reply had been. Elsie sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the world change outside her window. Green fields and tidy towns slowly gave way to wide, open land. The sky seemed bigger here, a huge bowl of blue over a sea of rolling, golden grass. It was beautiful, but it was also wild and a little frightening. When the train finally hissed and shuddered to a stop in Cedar Ridge, Elsie's heart thumped hard against her ribs. She gathered her 2 small bags, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the wooden platform. The town was small, just a dusty main street with a few buildings. The air smelled of hay and horses. She looked around, her eyes searching for the man from the letters. And then she saw him. He was standing near a wagon, holding his hat in his hands. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders and hair the color of sand. His face was serious, and his eyes, when they met hers, were the color of a stormy sky and held a deep, quiet sadness. Miss Whitford? He asked. His voice was soft and low, just as she thought it might be. Yes, Elsie said, managing a small smile. You must be Mr. Hale. He nodded. Reuben, he said. He did not smile back, but his manner was polite. Let me take your bags. He loaded her trunk into the back of the wagon and helped her up to the seat. The ride to the ranch was long and mostly quiet. Reuben pointed out a few things. That's the schoolhouse, he said. The children go there. And later, that creek marks the edge of my land. But mostly the only sound was the creak of the wagon and the whisper of the wind through the grass. Elsie tried to make conversation. The land is very beautiful, she said. It is, Reuben agreed and then fell silent again. She glanced at his profile. He was a handsome man, but it was like looking at a statue. He seemed closed off, locked away in his own thoughts. Elsie's hopeful spirit began to feel a little cold. She had known he would be grieving, but she had not expected such a wall of silence. After what felt like a very long time, a house came into view. It was a simple, sturdy wooden house with a porch. It was neat and clean on the outside, but it looked bare. There were no flowers by the steps, no curtains in the windows. Reuben pulled the wagon to a stop. This is it, he said. He led her inside. The inside of the house was the same as the outside. It was clean, but it felt empty. The floors were swept, the table was clear, but there were no pretty things, no signs of a woman's touch. It was a house, but it did not yet feel like a home. Then, 3 children appeared from another room, lining up in front of her. They were clean and their clothes were mended, but their faces were solemn. Reuben placed a hand on the shoulder of the tallest, a boy with serious eyes. This is Jonah. He's 10. Then, a girl with big watchful eyes. This is Millie. She's 7. And finally, the smallest, a little boy who stared at the floor. And this is Pip. He's 5. Hello, Elsie said softly, her voice full of kindness. It is so very nice to meet you all. None of them spoke. Jonah gave a small, stiff nod. Millie just stared. Pip hid slightly behind his brother's leg. The silence in the room was heavy and thick. Elsie felt it press down on her. She had come hoping to build a simple life, but in that moment, standing in that cold, quiet house with a sad man and 3 silent children, she felt a loneliness deeper than any she had felt in her own empty house. What had she done? Had she come all this way to a place where she was not needed after all? The days began to fall into a pattern, but it was a pattern woven with silence. Reuben would be gone before the sun was fully up, out to the endless work of the ranch. He would return only when it was dark, his body tired, his words few. He was not unkind. He provided a roof and food. But he was a ghost in his own home, a quiet presence that moved through the rooms without touching the life in them. Elsie tried her best. She cooked warm meals of stew and fresh bread. She kept the house even cleaner than it was before. She tried to talk to the children, asking them about their day, about the ranch, about the books they might like. But the walls of silence held strong. Meals were the hardest. The 4 of them would sit at the table, and the only sounds were the clinking of forks and the ticking of the clock. Jonah would answer a direct question with a yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am. Millie would only shake or nod her head. Pip did not make a sound at all. Their quiet was not a peaceful one. It was the quiet of hurt hearts, and it made Elsie's own heart ache. One afternoon she found a small porcelain doll with a cracked face tucked away on a high shelf in the bedroom the girls were to share. She carefully cleaned it and stitched a new little dress for it from a scrap of blue calico. She left it on Millie's pillow, saying nothing. The next morning the doll was gone, tucked away somewhere again. No thank you, no smile. Elsie felt a crushing disappointment. That night, in the small room that was hers, she knelt beside the bed. The loneliness was a physical weight on her shoulders. She missed her parents. She missed the feeling of being needed. Heavenly Father, she whispered into the quiet, I feel so lost. I thought this was the path you laid for me, but I cannot seem to find my way. Please give me patience. Give me a sign that I am meant to be here. Show me how to reach them. Help me to be a comfort even if they never say a word. She did not hear a voice answer. But as she prayed, a sense of calm settled over her. The desperate need to make them talk began to fade. She remembered that her own parents had always shown her love through steady, quiet actions, not just words. A new idea came to her. The next evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, she did not try to start a conversation. Instead, she took her well-worn Bible and sat in a chair on the porch. She did not call the children to her. She simply opened the book and began to read aloud. Her voice was soft and clear in the evening air. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. She read the Psalms not as a lesson but as a gift, letting the old, comforting words drift out into the yard where Jonah was doing his chores, and into the house where Millie and Pip were playing. She did not look to see if they were listening. She just read, offering the only thing she truly had to give, the steady, patient warmth of her spirit. It was not a sudden change. Jonah did not turn and listen. Millie did not come to the door. But the words were there, hanging in the air, a gentle noise to fight the crushing silence. It was a small start, but for the first time since she arrived, it felt like a start. The days turned into weeks, and Elsie held on to her new routine. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, her presence as steady as the sunrise. She baked bread that filled the kitchen with a warm, yeasty smell. She mended the children's clothes with tiny, neat stitches, making sure a loose button or a torn knee was fixed before anyone had to ask. And every evening, as the sky turned pink and orange, she would sit on the porch and read from her Bible. She did not force the children to join her. She simply let the words flow out into the twilight. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Jonah in particular watched her closely. At 10 years old he carried a heavy weight. He saw how hard his father worked, and he tried to be the man of the house when his father was away. He was polite to Elsie, but his guard was always up. He seemed to be waiting for her to leave, like a summer storm that would pass and be forgotten. One afternoon a crisis broke the ranch's routine. A young calf, one that Jonah had helped bring into the world and had named Scout, became very sick. The little animal lay in the barn, its sides heaving, too weak to stand. Reuben was miles away, checking on a distant fence line. Jonah was frantic. He tried everything he knew, but the calf only grew weaker. His small shoulders were tight with worry and fear. Elsie heard the commotion and came to the barn. She did not push Jonah aside or tell him what to do. She simply knelt in the straw on the other side of the calf. "My father had a few cows," she said softly, her voice calm. "When one took sick he would make a special mash. We could try that." Jonah looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. He gave a short, quick nod. Together they worked. Elsie showed him how to mix warm water with ground oats and a little molasses. She helped him gently hold the calf's head up, coaxing it to take small, wet bites. The afternoon light faded, and Jonah lit a lantern. They stayed there for hours, taking turns, their faces lit by the golden glow. Elsie did not complain about the smell or the late hour. She just stayed, her presence as solid as the barn walls around them. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, the calf stirred. It let out a soft, low sound and struggled to its feet. It was wobbly, but it was alive. Jonah let out a breath he seemed to have been holding all night. He looked from the calf to Elsie. Her dress was stained and there was straw in her hair. She looked tired, but she was smiling at him, her eyes full of a shared relief. He swallowed hard. "Thank you, Miss Elsie," he said. The words were simple, but they were the first he had ever given her freely from his heart. In that moment, the first crack appeared in the wall of silence and a little light shone through. The change in Jonah was small, but to Elsie, it felt as big as the Wyoming sky. He began to meet her eyes at the breakfast table. He started leaving his muddy boots by the door without being asked. It was not a grand transformation, but it was a start, and it gave Elsie the courage to focus on Millie. She thought often of the porcelain doll she had mended, the one Millie had hidden away. The girl was like a little bird, watching everything with her big dark eyes, but never making a sound. Elsie knew she could not push. She had to create a space where Millie felt safe enough to come out on her own. One rainy afternoon, Elsie brought a basket of mending into the main room. She sat near the fireplace where Millie was drawing on a slate. "This is a very pretty dress," Elsie said, holding up one of Millie's pinafores that had a small tear at the hem. "But this little tear is sad. It would be much happier if it had a friend to hold it together." She held up a spool of thread. "Would you like to help me find the right color thread for it?" Millie looked up, her eyes curious. She pointed silently to a light blue thread. "Ah, a fine choice," Elsie said, smiling. She threaded the needle and began to make tiny, neat stitches. "My mother taught me this. She said every stitch is a little prayer for the person who will wear the clothes." She worked quietly for a few minutes, then held out the needle. "Would you like to try? I can help you." Millie hesitated, then slowly she put down her slate and moved closer to Elsie. Her small hands were clumsy at first, but Elsie patiently guided her fingers, showing her how to push the needle through the fabric and pull it gently. They sat like that for a long time, the rain pattering on the roof, the fire crackling softly. There were no words, only the shared, quiet focus of their task. When the tear was mended, Millie looked at her work and then she looked up at Elsie. And then it happened. It was not a big smile. It was a small, shy, tentative lifting of the corners of her mouth. But it was there. It was a real, true smile that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face for just a second before she looked down again, as if surprised by her own happiness. Elsie's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. She did not make a fuss. She simply smiled back and said, "There. Now it's perfect. Thank you for your help, Millie." That little smile was a victory. It was a sign that the ice around the little girl's heart was beginning to melt, warmed by the steady, patient glow of a kindness that asked for nothing in return. The weather turned wild and restless. For days the air felt heavy and the sky was a strange, greenish color. Reuben looked at the clouds with a worried face, hurrying through his chores. That night the storm broke. Thunder crashed so loud it shook the house. Lightning flashed, turning the windows into bright blue squares for a single, scary moment. Inside, the children were in bed. Elsie was reading in her room when she heard a small, terrified whimper. Then came the sound of little feet running. Her door creaked open and there stood Pip, his face pale and streaked with tears, his whole body shaking. Without a word, he ran to her bed and scrambled onto it, burying his face in the covers. He did not run to his father's room. He had come to her. Elsie's heart swelled with a fierce, protective love. She sat beside him and gathered him into her arms. He felt so small. She began to rock him gently, humming a soft tune. When that did not seem to be enough, she began to sing the words, her voice a low, steady calm against the raging storm outside. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." It was a song her own mother had sung to her. Pip's shaking slowly stopped. His tight grip on her nightdress loosened. He listened to the gentle rhythm of the song until his breathing became even and deep, and he fell asleep in her arms. Elsie did not put him back in his own bed. She stayed there, holding him, a safe harbor in the thunderous night. The next morning the storm was gone, and the world was washed clean. Pip, who had been the most silent of all, ran outside to splash in the rain puddles. A sound came from him that Elsie had never heard before. It was a giggle, bright and clear as a bell, ringing across the wet yard. Reuben, coming out of the barn, stopped in his tracks. He heard the laughter. He saw Pip's joyful face and he saw Elsie standing on the porch, watching the boy with a look of pure love. He saw the trust his son had given her. A confusing mix of feelings washed over him. Relief that his boy was happy again, and a sharp, painful guilt that he had not been the one to comfort him. He turned and walked slowly towards the fields, his own heart as troubled as the stormy sky had been. Reuben decided the family needed supplies from town. The wagon ride was quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. Now it was filled with Pip's soft humming and Millie leaning comfortably against Elsie's side. In the general store, Reuben told the children they could each pick a piece of candy. While Elsie was looking at a bolt of fabric, she heard two women talking near the pickle barrel. Their voices were low, but they carried. "It's a shame, really," one woman said, her tone sharp. "That poor first wife, barely cold in the ground, and he brings a new one all the way from the east." The other woman clicked her tongue. "And to parade them in town so soon. He must be desperate for help. That one looks too soft for ranch life anyway." Elsie felt her face grow warm. The words were like little stings. But then she saw Millie's hand slip into her own, the little girl's face worried. Elsie looked over at Reuben. His back was stiff and she knew he had heard every word. She saw the shame and anger on his face. A new feeling, strong and firm, rose up inside Elsie. She was not a confrontational person, but she would not let this poison touch her family. She turned and walked calmly towards the two women, her head held high. "Good morning," Elsie said, her voice quiet but clear. The women looked up, startled and a little guilty. "I couldn't help but overhear you. I am Elsie Whitford. Mr. Hale is a good and honorable man who puts his children first every single day. He loved his first wife deeply, and her memory is honored in his home every day. I am there to help him, not to replace anyone. I would thank you to remember that." She did not raise her voice. She did not frown. She simply spoke the truth with a dignity that left both women speechless. They mumbled awkward apologies and quickly moved away. Reuben was staring at her. The anger had gone from his face, replaced by something else, a deep, wondering respect. On the wagon ride home he was quiet for a long time. Then he cleared his throat. "Elsie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What you did back there. Thank you." It was the first time he had ever said her name like that. It was not just Miss Whitford anymore. It was a thank you not just for the words but for standing up for him, for understanding his heart when even he could not. The wall between them was not just cracked now, a whole piece of it had fallen away. A few days later, the heart of the ranch, the deep well that gave water to the animals and the family, broke. The pump would not bring up a single drop. Reuben's face was grim. Without water, the ranch could not survive for long. This was a problem too big for one man. For the next 3 days, Reuben and Elsie worked side by side from sunrise until the stars came out. Elsie did not stay in the house. She carried buckets of water from the creek to the thirsty animals. She brought cool drinks to Reuben as he struggled with the heavy, stubborn machinery. She held tools for him, her hands growing rough and smudged with dirt. They spoke little, their energy spent on the work. But in the shared struggle, a new understanding grew. Reuben saw her strength not just of spirit but of body and will. He saw that she was not too soft for ranch life, she was its equal. She did not complain. She simply worked, her presence a steady comfort. On the evening of the third day, with a final hard turn of a wrench, water gushed from the pump, clear and cold. The crisis was over. They stood together, exhausted but victorious, watching the water spill into the trough. Reuben turned to her. The last of the sunset lit her face. Her hair was coming loose from its braid, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek. He thought she had never looked more beautiful. The words he had held inside for so long finally broke free. "I feel so guilty, Elsie," he whispered, his voice raw. "When I look at you, my heart, it feels lighter. And that feels like a betrayal. I loved Sarah. I still love her. Loving you feels like I am forgetting her." Elsie listened, her eyes soft and full of compassion. She did not reach for him. She just let him speak, her quiet strength giving him a safe place to finally share his pain. When he was finished, she spoke gently. "Reuben, love is not a pie. Giving me a slice does not mean there is less for her memory. Your heart is not a box that is full. It can grow. We can honor Sarah by living fully, by letting these children laugh again. She would not want you to be alone. She would not want their hearts to stay quiet forever." Her words were like a key turning in a rusty lock. They did not erase his past love, they made room for his future. He looked at this woman who had come into their lives with so much grace and patience, and he finally understood. She was not a replacement. She was a gift. A change came over the Hale household, as warm and noticeable as the spring sun melting the winter snow. The silence was gone, replaced by the sounds of a family. The children's hearts, once so quiet and hurting, were now full and open. They no longer saw Elsie as just a caretaker. They saw her as their own. One morning, Pip was trying to tell her about a frog he had found. The word "Miss Elsie" was too long and formal for his excitement. "Ma," he said, pointing out the window. "Ma, look. A big frog." The room went still for a single second. Millie looked at Pip, then at Elsie and smiled. "Yes, Ma. A very big one." Jonah did not say the word, but he nodded, his eyes agreeing. From that day on she was Ma. It was not a title given out of duty. It was a name given out of love. Reuben watched this new family bloom in front of him. He saw how Elsie's love had watered their parched hearts and made them grow. He started to court her, not as a mail-order husband, but as a man in love. He would walk with her in the evenings, talking about his dreams for the ranch, asking about her childhood. He laughed with her, a real, deep laugh that Elsie realized she had never heard before. The house itself seemed to come alive. Elsie had made curtains for the windows from the fabric she bought in town. Wildflowers sat in a jar on the kitchen table. The Bible was read together now, with the children taking turns. The home was no longer just clean, it was warm and it was full of love. The family was no longer broken, it had been restored, made new and whole again with Elsie as its gentle, beating heart. The morning was still and perfect, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. Elsie stood on the porch, her well-worn Bible held gently in her hands. But she was not reading. She was watching, her heart so full it felt like a song. In the yard the children played. Jonah was showing Millie how to toss a horseshoe. Pip was chasing a bright yellow butterfly, his giggles floating on the clean morning air. It was a sound she had once thought she might never hear. They were not quiet, hurting children anymore. They were joyful, they were loud, and they were loved. The screen door creaked softly behind her. Reuben stepped out onto the porch and came to stand beside her. He did not speak for a long moment, just watched the scene with her, his face peaceful. Then he turned to her. He reached out and very softly took her hand, his rough, rancher's fingers intertwining with her softer ones. "Elsie," he said, his voice low and full of emotion. He took a deep breath. "When I asked you to come here, it was out of duty. I needed help. The children needed care." He looked into her eyes, his gaze steady and sure. "But that is not why I am asking you to stay now. I am asking you to stay because I cannot imagine a single sunrise without you in it. I'm asking you to be my wife in truth, my partner, the love of my life." Tears of joy welled in Elsie's eyes. She did not have to think. She had known her answer for a long time. Yes, Reuben, she whispered, her smile radiant. Yes, with all my heart. He smiled back, a true, full smile that reached his eyes and lit up his whole face. He was no longer a man living in the shadows of the past. He was a man ready to live again, to love again, standing in the bright dawn of their future together. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony right there on the ranch, surrounded by the children and the vast, beautiful land that was their home. As the sun rose on their first day as a true family, the ranch was no longer a place of quiet sorrow. It was filled with the music of laughter, the warmth of love, and the promise of countless happy days to come. If you enjoyed following Elsie and Reuben's journey from sorrow to joy, please like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.